Welcome and good morning to Mike Ferry TV, the week of March 4th. Boy, the time is flying by fast. 2 months down, 10 to go. How have you done? How many listings have you taken? How many listings sold? How many buyer-controlled sales have you had? How many closings? How much income? These are vital numbers. Now, we know for a fact that the majority of most companies and most agents have had a very slow start. 100 good reasons why, but none of them are valid because there's also tons of agents that have had the best start in history in the first 2 months of the year. So we got to get everybody on track to working. When I started doing seminars, which now has been almost 44 years ago, I used to start every seminar by putting up on the whiteboard or the blackboard, whatever I had available, 3 letters, the letter P, the letter P, and the letter C. Now, I've talked about this to you folks before. The first P, of course, stood for prospecting. That form of finding people that have an interest in doing business with you for buying and selling real estate. Vital part of any sales position is talking to people. Our industry is not a big fan of prospecting for some reason. I wonder at times, how do we expect to do contracts, get listings, make sales if we're not in conversations with people? The second P, of course, is the word presentation. How well do you present yourself? How professional is your attire, your look, the words you use, the expressions you have, your ability to respond, to bring people to a point of contract signed, your ability to ask questions. How good a performer are you? Presentation. Then the third C, of course, is the word close. Getting a signature, getting a contract signed, taking some positive action towards an end result. So what I used to do, and it was always fun, I would always say to the audience, after doing, say, a 5 to 8 minute explanation on each of the 3, prospect, present, and close, then I would say, now we're going to do a vote. I'm going to ask everybody to raise their hands and pick one of the 3. And then I used to always joke and say, of course, the analyticals won't have time to make a decision because they're too slow in the decision-making process, so they have to decide right away. And of course, people would chuckle. Well, the truth is, it's not complicated. We have to all vote on one of the 3. Is prospecting the most important step? Is the presentation the most important step? Or is the close the most important step? And we would then do a vote by a show of hands. So I would say, okay, how many picked prospecting? And I would say, generally, it would be about 80% of the audience. So I would write under the letter P, 80%. How many would pick the close? And it would be the majority of those people that didn't pick prospecting. So I would write down 15%. Then I would say, okay, now for those of you that couldn't decide, how many picked presentation? And it would be about 5%. I'd say, okay, great. Now let's think about this. Is a past client a prospect? Yes or no? And they would say yes. Is a for sale by owner a prospect? Yes or no? They would say yes. Do you stop at all the for sale by owners? Do you call them all the time? They would say no. I said, well, then I'm confused. If a for sale by owner is a prospect, a past client who has the desire or interest in doing some, again, is a prospect, and you're not calling him, what's the point of your having these names and phone numbers in your file, in your system, in your lead follow-up? And they would always kind of get that blank look. Then I would say, well, we all agree that you have to prospect if you're going to do a deal. They'd say, well, yeah. I'd say, so why did you pick prospecting? Well, without a prospect, we can't present, we can't close. If we don't prospect, we have nobody to talk to. If we don't prospect, we don't have any leads. I'd say, you're right. Good. Okay. Thank you for that. Then I would say, how many picked the close as the most important step? 15%. I'd say, why? And it was always the drivers. You got to hammer them down. You got to nail them down. You got to get that pen into their hand. They got to be signing a contract. It's the finalization. It's the whole deal right there when they sign that contract. It's the celebration. Great. Okay. I'd say, well, let me ask you a question. How many of you picked presentation? 4 or 5 people. Why? Well, we didn't vote for the first 2. Very common response. I'd say, okay, let's look at that. If a for sale by owner expired listing, a past client, is a prospect, and you're not going to call them and talk to them, you have nobody to present to. So we all agree on that, right? They'd say right. I'd say, but let me ask you a question. Why do you really drive by a for sale banner and not stopped? I'm too busy. I have someplace else to go. I'm going to call them later. Standard. We hear it 1,000 times. Isn't the truth the reason you don't contact a lot of the good leads you have is you're not comfortable in making the presentation to them? And you could see that look of, well, maybe that's the case. So the reason we don't prospect is because we don't know how to present. And if you do call a prospect and you get a presentation set up for 7 o'clock tomorrow, now the pressure is on you to perform. You've got to go ahead now, you got to get to work and know what to say to get them to sign a contract. So the truth is, presenting is more important than prospecting. They'd go, well, I guess you're right. I said, now for those that pick the close, would you agree with this? If you make a weak presentation, hi, it's so nice to be here tonight, and I just love your home, it's so pretty, oh wow, and you have kids and I have kids, and oh, you have a puppy and I love puppies. That's a weak presentation. Have you ever noticed when you make a weak presentation, it's hard to get a contract signed? And they would kind of nod. I'd say, well, isn't it truthful then when you think about it, that the quality of the close depends upon the strength of the presentation? And they would nod their heads. So then I would circle the P for presentation. Because see, if I don't know what to say, talking to a buyer or seller, it's very hard to get out and prospect because it's called frustration. I generate leads, whether you're buying them off the internet, coming off a sign call, a walk-in from an open house, or through other types of prospecting. You have a lead, and if you don't know what to say, you won't talk to them. So why would you prospect? And if you're going to make a presentation, and the presentation is weak, and you're fumbling and mumbling and stumbling at what you have to say, and you can't respond to the questions they bring up, and you can't answer the objections they have, isn't it very difficult to get a contract signed? Well, of course it is. So the truth is, everything about the sales process revolves about our ability to master the presentation. So why do we have your role play and practice, having accountability partners? And why when you go to seminars, do we always talk about the presentation? Why do we have a 4-day productivity school where you're practicing for 4 days out loud with somebody else your presentation skills to build your confidence to do the job? Well, as we look at January and February having gone by, and too many of our clients and too many people in real estate have not had the type of success they want yet, then we say, why don't you work on strengthening your performance, strengthening your presentation? Be truthful, be obviously correct in what you say, have the facts, have your scripts, have the questions. If you have to walk in and read it to them and say, I've written down these really important questions to ask you tonight, may I ask them now? And they say yes, and you read the questions off the script, which then helps them make a decision and get you to the obvious point, getting a contract signed. So as you've heard me say for years, so much of our ability to present is the attitude we have towards selling, the attitude we have towards being a salesperson, the attitude we have towards strong skills, the attitude we have towards elevating ourselves above the competition. And that, of course, attitude is what strengthens the presentation. See, if I say to you, who's the best listing agent in your office, and you don't yell, I am, you're making a mistake. And if you point and say, well, it's actually that person over there, then why wouldn't the seller list with them versus listing with you? It all goes back to the attitude you have. I had a person walk up to me at our production retreat in January and say, okay, now you've been doing this a long time. You've seen all the speakers. I said, I haven't seen them all, but I know most of them. Why? Well, who do you think is the best trainer in real estate? I said, I am. And he looked at me and said, well, it's awfully cocky. I said, well, would you come to my event for 3 days if I said somebody else was that much better than I was? And do you really believe that sellers are going to put you in second place and somebody else is better than you? If you don't believe in yourself, the vote is unanimous. That's an attitude you have to have. And how do you learn to believe in yourself? Practice, rehearse, and practice, and rehearse, and practice, and rehearse. But practice and rehearse good scripts and dialogues from the Mike Ferry organization. Practicing poorly only solidifies poor practice and brings you poor results. So the attitude is the critical part. And of course, the approach, which you've heard me talk about for years, is not only your physical presence, the smile on your face, it's not only your attitude, your energy, your enthusiasm, the firmness of your handshake or your shoes shined. This is all part of the approach. I've shared this in the past. This happened late last summer. One of our good clients sent me an email. Mike, I walked up to the door. I had pre-qualified the seller, sent out the pre-listing package as you suggested. I followed up with a phone call to make sure they've read it. I showed up at 7 o'clock, knocked on the door. Lady answered, said, come on in, we're ready to sign the contract. And the salesperson said, I hadn't said a word yet. I hadn't, besides good evening, I hadn't made a presentation. They said, we're ready to sign the contract. He said, fine, they signed it. After he accepted the signature, he said, I have to ask, why would you ask me to just let you sign the contract without the presentation? And they said, because the other agent we were going to talk to was here an hour before you. Knocked on the door, had on shorts, tennis shoes, a golf shirt. We thought he was a gardener. We took one look, we closed the door. You showed up, you're dressed as a pro, you got the deal. Folks, attitude and approach, and then adding the third word, expectations. Walking in knowing that you can do the job. Knowing you have the expectation they're going to accept what you have to say. And that expectation builds in the presentation of what you're trying to offer them. Think about prospect, present, and close. Think about attitude, approach, and expectations. Think about winning 70 to 75% of the time, which you can do. And let's think about making March a great month because of you and your skill level. Talk to you next week. Have a great week.